So what do we learn about Asian values? This is what I take away. It doesn't have to be what you take away. There's a lot of data here. And I don't think there's any kind of one right, obvious way to synthesize and distill it all here. But I didn't really have time to get into this. Levels of political trust are not really very high, particularly in parties in parliament. They're pretty low, especially in the advanced industrial democracies, even more so than in Thailand and Indonesia. But still, people, even with that, they're not super happy with their parties and their politicians and so on. They're very critical citizens. There's a lot of protest, a lot of demands, but a lot of support for democracy, and even more so, a lot of rejection of all the authoritarian options. Slim majorities, solid majorities do believe they have a real and at least decently functioning democracy. At worst, it's a democracy with minor problems. There's generally very strong support with democracy, for democracy, but with some caveats. But only the liberal democracies, in terms of the quality of democracy, as measured by Freedom House or the Economist Democracy Index, also have strong public support for the liberal democratic, architecture of checks on executive power and broad rights for civil society and so on. Majorities in the liberal democracies pretty consistently and robustly support liberal democratic values, but then it's kind of only a substantial minority. It's not a small minority, but it's not a majority in these other democracies of East Asia, or hopefully to return to be a democracy, Thailand. So, there is some kind of coexistence here, and if you're looking for evidence that Asian values still prevail in much of Asia, you'd probably find it when you descend below the level of the D word and actually look at what do they think and believe about the operation and structure of democracy and the extent of rights. And then you get the most crystallized illiberal sentiment in Burma, not surprising, the poorest of these countries, the one that is the least democratic of the ones we're looking at. And then you get this potential that China's moving at least a little bit in a more pluralistic direction at the level of values. Okay, any questions about this?
So when you said that China's moving in a pluralistic direction at the level of values, do you think, are there any other levels at which it's moving at, or is it just
No.
the change values? Okay.
No, if you look at the level of regime structure and regime behavior, the system is indisputably far more authoritarian, controlling, and intimidating today, I think, than it was 10 or certainly 20 years ago. And a perfect example of that is what you probably know, since you're studying computer science, the social credit system, the effort to really monitor all citizens and aggregate all the data about their private behavior, economic, political, social media commentary, where they go. This is being merged with facial recognition data about where they visit, whether they're showing up at protests. Everything is being aggregated into an overall score of fidelity to the ideology and rules of the Chinese Communist Party state. And the scope for dissent, for criticism, for defense of human rights activity in the judicial system, for exercise of cultural rights, just the practice of private religious faith, it's all being increasingly and even aggressively and arbitrarily constrained. So the political system, I think, clearly is moving in an even more authoritarian, maybe even Orwellian or authoritarian direction. At the level of values, we have this kind of interesting mix of some significant portion of the public. It's been growing slightly on average across the recent surveys, but I will concede that there's not been dramatic change. I do think the new ideological campaign that Xi Jinping has launched in recent years, since coming to power in 2012, is in response to fear of ideological pollution. And he's trying to squeeze these liberal ideas and space for them, and some sense that maybe this is a better way for China to go. He's trying to squeeze that out of the system. Yeah?
I'm not sure if there was a straight answer to this, but how do you go about promoting democracy and liberal sentiment in places like Burma where most people are against it? And do you think only economic development may be the solution to that?
So we'll come to the issue of democracy promotion and how we can promote change later on in the course. But I will say what I think should be obvious. You can't force democracy down the throats of a society that is wary of it, that doesn't think it's the best way to govern. All you can do as an external actor, whether you're a governmental actor, non-governmental actor, university, whatever you might be, is try and create more space for pluralistic thinking, more awareness of the variety of systems, more intellectual and normative debate, more tools and resources to access alternative ways of thinking and alternative sources of information. And if you as a state in particular could have the power to do so, which we do not do with China, but might be able to do with some weaker states, create inducements to allow more space for society to explore different ways of thinking and different sources of information, and to punish through sanctions of some kind, diplomatic or otherwise, active repression. I think you can't force it down the throats of people who don't think they want it. Yeah.
What kind of tension or friction is currently existing?
What kind of?
It just seems like in China more people are having liberal democratic values at the same time that Xi Jinping is trying to consolidate. So it seems like there'd be at least some friction there.
Well, there is friction, but think about how this friction would be expressed and in some way resolved. If you are thinking you'd like to see, maybe not democracy, you're not sure about democracy, you just like more openness, more freedom to access the internet, more security for your property rights. So you can't have a communist party boss, tap on your shoulder and say, I'd like your business. It's kind of like the mafia. Which is it going to be? You can hand me control of your business through a shadow arrangement that isn't fully disclosed, or, we will arrest you for corruption, real or imagined, and you can spend the rest of your life in jail. It's kind of like the mafia. Which choice would you like to make? So a growing number of people are simply leaving. And frankly, many of them are living within a 25-mile radius of where we're sitting right now. And the great economist, political economist and thinker, Albert Hirschman, wrote a book called Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. So some people are loyal to the system and will defend it. Some people will decide they want to use voice to try and change the system. And others, if they despair of the possibility of bringing about change, will, then they've got a fork in the road to just kind of quietly disguise their resentments or keep them within very safe and tentative boundaries, or just leave. And even leaving doesn't provide security. I mean, you've got, if the Chinese Communist Party state can arrest and coercively bring back to mainland China and then disappear the head of Interpol, their own nominee to be the head of the International Police Organization, you know, then a lot of people ask who's safe. Anyway, those are some of the options people are